It is a pleasure to be here again today in the Identity Masterclass. I want to welcome Caroline Hopp, a very dear friend of mine. We have connected some time ago at the Boom Festival in Portugal, and today I have the pleasure to welcome her and her expertise around trauma, shame, and all the beautiful stuff here in the Identity Masterclass. Caroline, welcome to this class. How are you doing? How has your day been so far?
Hey, Renato. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited, very happy to co-create here with you. And right now I'm feeling very good, very excited to go into one of my favorite topics, trauma and shame. I mean, not that I enjoy trauma in its way, but I think it's a very important topic in the world that affects almost everyone. So just having a lot of knowledge around it and sharing this, I think, is really, really important. So I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely a pleasure. I really love these gatherings where we can share either to ourselves, but also like with other people caring to listen and sit in. So you just touched it on, right? For many people, trauma and shame and all these things is something that we tend to not look at. I would really love to understand, where is your personal experience in these areas? Did you ever experience trauma yourself, or has it just been some, I don't know, fancy that you just developed over time? It's like, oh wow, I'd really want to investigate further. What's your experience with the matter, Caroline?
I definitely experienced trauma for sure in my life. I actually believe that everyone on the planet has experienced trauma in their lives. And I'll get to that maybe a little bit later, why I'm convinced that that is the reality. But me, myself, personally, I actually come from a family that was very much defined by abuse and I had a lot of actually traumatic experiences in my life. My biological father was an alcoholic, and there were a lot of destructive and toxic behavior patterns in our family that happened. A lot of violations, a lot of things that happened for sure, that shocked me when I was a child and traumatized me. And leading to the definition of trauma that has recently been published by Gabor Mate, you probably know him, that trauma is actually having anxiety around expressing your authentic self. So you are actually sacrificing your authenticity for attachment. And that is something that we learn in childhood, when our parents are not validating what we are feeling, or they are shaming us for a certain behavior, or they're punishing us. As a child, we think, oh wow, this is not welcome. This part of me is not welcome. My authentic expression, for example, experiencing anger, if I want the chocolate and my mother doesn't want to buy me the chocolate, is not welcome. And the attachment, the love, the connection, the relationship is taken away from me. And as a child, I need that connection. So I learn to suppress my authenticity, and therefore keeping the attachment. And that is really the root of trauma. And of that, I can tell you, I have experienced a lot.
Nice that you can smile about it now, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if I think of these experiences, and now that I'm, say, like more aware of what trauma is and how it affects me, and now reflecting onto my past, suddenly it pops up like mushrooms everywhere. And I realize, wow, there was actually a lot of it. And so for many people, I think it's still a lot of, like, a little mystified as to what it is, and how we can identify that we actually experienced it. So would you care to, if I understood that correctly, shame is a symptom, say like a mechanism of trauma expression. Yes. Would you care to explain a little bit more about this, because it's also a major topic of today's talk? What is
Yeah.
shame to you, and where did you experience it, maybe?
So shame actually works with the same mechanism of fearing that our authenticity will lead to disruption in the attachments or in the connections, the relationships that I have. And in that matter, shame actually works in our society as the social glue. Shame is actually what makes us stick to social norms and also some part follow the rules that are set by society. And that can be, on the one hand, that can be laws. So something that is really put there by the government, but it can also be something that is unspoken, yeah, like unspoken behavior that is tolerated in a social group, in a culture, in a country. Yeah, so shame occurs if we don't follow the social norms. So if we do something that is against the social norm, we feel it's like, oh shit, and then the shame comes in, right? So it's very individual and very dependent also on the culture where we live in. So very dependent on our conditioning, depending on, let's take for example nudity, yeah, because that is also related to sexuality. In Eastern Germany, for example, if we talk about Germany, being nude on the beach or at the lake is something very normal for them. In Western Germany, that is a little bit different. Yeah, people are a little bit more closed when it comes to nudity in public bathing areas, right? And so a lot of people that come from Western Germany to Eastern Germany to go to a lake to have a swim in the summer experience shame when they see how the people that live there and grew up there just like very freely change themselves on the lake. They don't cover their genitals in public. They just do it because it's normal for them, right? So it's very dependent on the cultural surroundings we grew up in. So in its core, what we can say is shame is the fear of rejection, right? Um, because if I'm not doing what everyone is doing, if I break a social norm, chances are rising that I could be excluded from that group. And that is something that is very threatening to us as humans because we are very social beings and we want to be part of the group. We want to maintain the connection. We want to maintain the attachment. And we want to be loved in a way, right? So that's pretty much the core of it.
That that resonates a lot, especially when thinking of my own experiences, of course. That fear of abandonment, that kind of like that fear of rejection, of that I am not wanted, makes me then violate my authentic expression, right? And that eventually becomes a habit where I am hiding parts of myself. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And I think it's so I'd like to say maybe I'd love to learn if that resonates with you. For me, shame only exists because we try to hide it. I'd like to refer to it. You know, it's literally existing in the shadows where we don't look in the blind spot, so to say. Um, so yeah, that brings me to the next question, and that I'd love to ask you. Where does it exactly come from? I mean, we already touched on it briefly, but could you maybe explain a little further? How does shame come about? Like, how is it developed? If you would like to put that in a couple of words.
Yeah, that also has a lot to do with our upbringing. If we stick to the example of nudity and also authenticity, because that's very much related. If you take the example of a child, so a child in its beginnings is just completely authentic. So when the child has an emotion, it just lives the emotion. If it has anger, it throws a tantrum, or I don't know. And the same goes with everything that has to do with the body and just like playfulness, right? Children are very playful. And so, for example, let's say, okay, the child is just playing, it's playful, I don't know. And then it feels like, okay, I want to take off my pants. And in a public place, the child takes off the pants. And then maybe even, I don't know, rubs its genitals against something because that feels good. The child at that moment doesn't feel any shame and doesn't feel like it's doing anything wrong or bad or ugly or nasty or all these words that people would put onto this. But then when in the moment comes, for example, one of the parents comes and he or she says, "Don't do this. What are you doing? What's wrong with you? We don't do this in public. This is wrong. Put your pants back on." That's the moment when the child experiences shame, because it is shamed by its own parent in that moment. And that gets very, very deeply into the system, into the nervous system, and into the body. And it's saved as this, like, oh, okay, I don't do this, otherwise I will be shamed. I will be excluded from the group, or I will be punished, or the love will be taken away from me, which brings us back to the fear of rejection.
Yeah, yeah. Especially about, I mean, what pops up to me, and I've been talking about this on lengths, but sometimes it's very difficult for people to notice the difference. Say, like this little child who is doing what it naturally feels like doing, yes, and has like this kind of like, okay, like I'm gonna rub myself on this, I don't know, street lamp pole now because that just feels fun. Um, and now it gets cut off in its action, and there I see oftentimes a correlation between the guilt of like, I did something wrong, right? The parent tells, like, this is wrong, you shouldn't have done this, it's very bad, toward the identification then to be wrong. And so I would really love you, if you don't mind, maybe shed a little light on the difference between you have done something wrong and we identifying ourselves as being wrong, where I kind of like see a big, like it's very important for people to understand the difference, right? So what's the difference between the guilt, the feeling of guilt? Ah, I did something wrong. Maybe I did something that people don't want me to do. And then because of that, I feel something.
So basically, I don't really believe in guilt, to be honest, as a concept, but it's also a concept that works, in terms of society, and it's beneficial for society if people feel guilty about certain things. Yeah, and it's very, very close to the mechanism of shame, right? So let's go back to that situation. Yeah, I like the child is doing whatever it wants to do. It's rubbing, it's being shamed and being punished by its parent, and then in that moment it feels the shame. And shame is a very it's a feeling that is very close to the body. Yeah, and it's that's why I also put this example of nudity and sexuality, because shame is often very much related also to intimacy in a sexual encounter, or like my body, because we learn that we need to, put clothes on, and nudity is not something that we do, da 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 da. And the guilt comes in that moment, where I'm like, okay, I did something that made, let's say, mommy feel wrong, make her feel bad. Yeah, and maybe she blames me for that too. So maybe she says, now I'm embarrassed because you did this. So now I'm putting on the guilt. And I'm like, oh wow, I am responsible for her feeling. I mean, that is the essence of guilt, and that is why I don't necessarily believe in it. Because, of course, if I do something, that has always an effect, and that always causes a reaction in somebody. Yeah, whatever that might be something pleasurable, might be something not so nice. But am I responsible for that feeling that's going on in the other person? I don't know. Or is the person responsible for what she's feeling? Right? So that's
Mhm.
why I'm not really also believing in the concept of guilt in a way. But in that moment, I'm taking over the responsibility. And as a child, why do I do that? Because I am dependent until a certain age of my parents. I need them to survive. And so my body and my nervous system and my mind are very clever. So in that moment, I take over the shame, because that makes it understandable for my system why mommy and daddy are withdrawing their love from me. So I put it back on myself. So I go into oh, something is wrong with me. That is
Mhm.
why they are doing that. Because if
Mhm.
it would take the opposite conclusion, be like, something is wrong with them, that would be life threatening for me. Because if something is wrong with them, I'm gonna die, or I'm in this threat of dying. And that's
Mhm.
how it is developed.
Interesting. I really like how you are putting, say, the context of guilt into question, as such as guilt requires other people to put, like, kind of like give away the responsibility for their feelings onto whoever made them feel, right? I believe that's very important to like to digest, maybe to listen into a little closer. But let's go on because there is a particular reason why we continue then to experience shame and cultivate it in our nervous system, in our behavior, right? Why? So where is the benefit as such as to continue experiencing shame? Because I could just also say, okay, now I'm out of the house, and my parents are now not, not to judge anymore, and so I'll just ditch them. But what's the benefit? Why do I keep continuing this shame pattern in myself? Because it then like gets reinforced, reenacted over the course of my development of my life. So what's the benefit if you have any thought on that?
I wouldn't really say that there's a real benefit of it. If I look at it, yeah, I think there's no real benefit. But of course, we all experience shame, right? And so we have like this um, group commitment to to the norm and to the shame behavior, and that some things are shameful and some are not. So if we go back to the fear of rejection, of course, maybe I'm not so much fearful anymore of the rejection of my parents, although I find that pretty much the people I work with still have that. And we take that and we project that onto the relationships we have afterwards. So it's not just like, okay, my parents did that to me and it's just happening between my parents and me. It's happening in all my relations, right?
Mm,
So it's not that easy. And the problem with shame is that, and you tapped into that already a little bit, that the nature of it is that we hide it. So we
mm,
also don't want others to know what we feel shame about. Yeah, because then we feel embarrassed again. And it's a very, very hidden feeling. It's also a feeling that very easily gets turned into something else. So let's say I do something that, like, I'm doing something in privacy. I'm gonna take a personal example. So when I was younger, I had bulimia, which is an eating disorder. So I would eat a lot, I would binge, and that I would purge, right? And for that, I felt like I experienced so much shame, right? Because I found this is a disgusting behavior. Who does this? Da 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 da. All these things. So if someone, and I only did this when I was alone. So when I was certain no one would come and find me doing this, because that would have been the most terrific thing for me in the world, right? So if someone would have entered the room while I was doing this, what I would have done, I experienced the shame, but that would not be the thing I would show. I would transition that into anger or something like that. And I would probably scream at the person, like, what the fuck are you doing here? Da, da, da. So I don't show what I'm actually experiencing, because the shame is one of the most vulnerable emotions and feelings that we can have, right?
mm,
And this gets bigger and bigger through the hiding of it and
mm,
through the behavior that is attached to the shame. If we hide it, through that it gets bigger and bigger. And then we also judge it. We judge ourselves for the things we feel shame. We're like, why are you even doing this? And we're putting ourselves down. And that makes it bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And so in our head, it gets even bigger than it is in reality. So something I feel shame for, if someone else would know, probably that person would be like, I don't even understand why you are ashamed of this.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
so it's really just in our head.
And that sounds awfully like fear. I've been fascinated by fear. Honestly, I tell you, I've been fascinated by fear for most of my life. I remember a story that has inspired me to conquer my fears, and I'm speaking of all of them. So I intentionally went to look for them. And something that I've noticed is that fear always looks bigger than it actually is. However, it is very convincing in its appearance. So, and that makes shame as such something that we are experiencing, like a real depth of it, where we feel like, I really don't want to go there. I'm trying to avoid it by all means, right? Because I have,
Yes.
as you said yourself, right? I have experienced such a profound um, feeling of vulnerability of being wrong as such, that I don't want to go back there. So
Yes.
if we take all of this that we just talked about and like dissect that a little bit, and now put that into a context of relationships in general, but also romantic relationships. Where do you see that affect us in everyday life? Is there any, I mean, of course, there's plenty of ways that this can affect us, but say like the core essence where we can identify that we are just affected by guilt or shame, shame as such, and hence of trauma.
Yeah. I mean, for sure, you know, if you if you enter an intimate, a romantic relationship, usually what happens in the beginning, you try to show yourself from the best version of you. Like you have no flaws, and you know you are just like you're your best version ever. And there are these things that you feel shame for. I'm pretty sure we all have them. And in my own journey, I have released a lot, and I feel much freer, which is also something that's, I think, very important, that actually shame is kind of a cage, and releasing shame brings you more into freedom, right? And basically it comes back again to this authenticity and attachment thing. So what a lot of people tend to do is they show their best selves when they enter a new romantic relationship, and they also act a little bit. So they're not actually their true self from the beginning, because they fear if they reveal how they really are, that person's not going to love them, because that's what they experienced when they were children. So we, you know, like we do this, go through this honeymoon phase, and everything's nice and it works for a little while. But there is a moment, if you continue to stay with that person, you will not be able to do this forever. At some point, the masks are going to fall and the layers are going to go off. And then that is the moment where you actually can tell if the relationship is something real or not. Because I believe that real love means that I want the other person in their full, authentic expression, and I'm celebrating and I'm loving that. And if I reveal my full self and the other person is like repelled by that, that is okay. You know, that's not bad in itself, but then this is not who I want to be with, because I want someone to celebrate who I truly am. And that's also why I recommend to everyone, don't do this acting thing in the beginning, right? Just like be as authentic as you can possibly be and share yourself, and see if the other person can love that, right? And maybe even express what you feel shame about, right? That is actually the only way to release the shame, is name it to tame it. And we think that is something, the story that we have in our heads is, if I speak what I feel shame for, it's even going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's why I'm trying to hide it. But the truth is, the moment you talk about it, first thing, you feel less shame immediately. And second thing is, you are actually getting back into charge. You are back in control over it. Because when it's just inside you, it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's actually controlling you, right?
Wow, that's very powerful. I think, especially how you put into perspective that, I mean, I really love the example of like the first couple of times that you meet someone and you just try to shine as best as you can, put on all the nice clothes, all the makeup, whatever. And then ultimately we just feel like, coming to that boundary, say like 3 months, 6 months, wherever, where we have played all our cards, had all the fun sex, like all the great experiences, and then, okay, so what's there left? And that's really when you get, to the juice of things, where you get to know each other really, what's all beneath that layer. And I mean, wow, if I look back into my relationships, I see it so often turn out that I just never got over this, like a year and a half, where it just I couldn't deal with myself. Now looking back, I know that, because the way that I was expressing myself, like bounced back from my partner into my face, and I couldn't bear her. It's like, ugh, I don't want to deal with that. And so of course it's always the other person. And so we're endlessly kind of recreating these loops. But let's go a little deeper into the sexuality part, the juicy thing. How about shame and guilt so where do you see yourself being, like, personally maybe affected by shame in your sexual relationships, like in your sexual experiences? Do you feel like it goes the same way as in like how you express yourself? So the louder you scream, the better. Or so in what context can I put that? Because that, for me,
Yeah.
when I'm thinking about how I'm restricting myself in a sexual environment, that becomes very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, totally depends also on the sexual environment. If we're talking about a one-on-one encounter or something more group related. But I think so. Personally, I experienced a lot of shame around my body related to the eating disorder. So I was, I didn't want my partners to touch my belly. I didn't want to show myself fully naked. So I turned off the lights, or I turned around when I was undressing myself. So that is something I personally experienced a lot. And then something that, it's always going back to that authenticity part, because I didn't want it to show my authentic body or my real body, because I felt shame for that, and I was fearing of being rejected for how I was looking. And that can go into all areas of sexuality. So it can be this, like, okay, am I pretty enough, am I beautiful enough? Or if I go a little bit deeper, the fear of letting go, of surrendering, and then, oh my god, how does my face look like when I'm coming, when I'm having an orgasm, and just like really, really stepping into this, not controlling anymore. So I feel like the releasing of shame is also pretty much associated with letting go of control and surrendering, right? And that is also related to noises. How much noises do I make? Am I authentically expressing what's going on? And then also coming back to the guilt, am I able to express also what I want sexually, or what I like and what I dislike? Or do I have to, for example, what I often feel, I don't know if you know the wheel of consent.
Hmm.
Yeah, so there are these four different dynamics, right?
Yeah,
And
but maybe explain it to everybody listening, because I believe that most people who are watching this or listening this might just not know it.
yeah, okay, so it's kind of hard to explain it quickly, because usually I do workshops that do, like, they last like 4 hours just around this model. But it's basically a model of different types of interactions that are related to sexual encounters, but can also be applied to everyday life encounters, right? And so there are two dynamics. One is giving or serving and receiving or accepting, and the other dynamic is taking and allowing. And I often find people, when I put them into the different dynamics, that they experience guilt in a way to have to pay something back, especially in the giving and receiving encounter in this dynamic. Because so if I'm giving something to you, right, and you are receiving, chances are high, if people have difficulty in feeling worthy, that's of receiving something, that they feel guilt. And then afterwards they say, okay, if he gives me a massage now for 20 minutes, I have to pay that back. And I also have to massage him, or I have to give him a blowjob, or whatever, right? So that's also how guilt plays into this in sexuality and intimacy.
Hmm. Wow, yeah. I mean, I can think of numerous encounters where I felt like either I am taking now, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe I want to be giving, but allowing to receive, that shivers, like I
Mm-hmm.
remember when people tell me I love you, the very first thing that I feel is like, and then I kind of like, okay, so yeah, it happens. I
Yeah.
love you too, or you're an amazing person. Thank you so much, and so forth. But I deflected instantly, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
that's really how I experienced that, especially also around sexuality for a long time. Um, so here, what we've been talking about, like in half an hour or so, is like really in depth about where and how to identify shame in our relationships. There's tons and
Mm-hmm.
tons and tons more to speak about. I'm very sure that you have like bags full of information, and it's very inspiring to listening to you. Now, let's talk really quickly. How do you help your clients, maybe also the groups and workshops and retreats? I've seen that you do an amazing events.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help people to release and work with shame as such, or trauma?
Mm-hmm.
in your container?
Yeah. So what I do is I offer a space where we deeply go into the embodiment and back into the body and into feeling. Because as I said, it's shame is very much also related to the body. So it's very you can experience it in your body. So if you feel shame, and I think you're going to talk about this also a little bit, right? So I don't know, you have a different posture. Things are happening on the outside that are visible on the outside, but things are also happening on the inside, right? So
Mm,
you feel your muscles contract. You might feel nauseous. You might feel something in your throat or whatever. It can be different depending on what you experienced and who you are. So one thing that we do, or I do in my room, is that I bring people back into the feeling and I create a safe space where they can just allow the feeling to happen and
mm,
where they get conscious about it. Because what really needs to be done to release this is to once feel it. That's the first thing. Feel it and allow it and not resist it anymore, push it away, suppress it, because that's what we want to do with it, right? And then from there, have them have the experience that the fear that is connected to the shame is actually not happening,
mm,
right? And they experience through the interaction they have with me, or if we are in a group setting, through the interaction that we have in the group. And that is the real healing for me, because shame is very much related to relating to other people. If I'm
mm,
just with myself, I'm also experiencing shame, but mostly since it's the fear of rejection, it's like, okay, I am not so much rejected by myself. Of course, that can also happen, but it is really related to these other people, right? So
mm.
that's in a nutshell what we do, and I use different tools and different techniques to go into this and to guide people back into their bodies.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it sounds very intense. Also, following your work on social media, I believe you have Instagram and Facebook where
I
people
do.
can find you. And so, like, I really enjoy the content that you put out, especially when it comes to how to actively engage with these things. And as you said beautifully, I remember one core element that you mentioned that I really could resonate with is the idea that, like, the picture of a cage. That's where I see a lot of transformational possibilities for us to really break free from this cage, and like to to really fully embody a certain expressive capacity in our everyday life that can be an intimate relationship, but also at work. I see it a
Yeah.
lot when I work with my clients. They tend to hide themselves behind imagery, like behind status and money and whatnot. The end of the day, it's just a different pack, right? It's different wrappings.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the appreciation. And now I would really love to. I already mentioned it, right? Because you also have a very specific expertise. So how does shame influence our posture and in our everyday life? So how does shame influence us? And maybe you also want to share something about your personal life. Did you experience shame, and how did that influence you on a daily basis?
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for passing over that ball here. I believe that yes, as you said beautifully, I also believe that we all experience shame to some degree. Interestingly, when I was researching indigenous tribes, a fascination became apparent for me when I was looking into the behavior and like the differences, but also the similarities between our Western culture and indigenous cultures. What I saw is that even indigenous cultures, they have a fear of an authority that usually is some form of deity, and that can be like a very mystified, vague kind of being, such as like nature or Mother Earth or Father Sky or something. But it can also be very, very particular, such in Mayan culture, where they have like characteristics and so forth. So there is a very clear ideal that we experience when engaging with social norm, and that's where I see one of the core triggers that then keep us engaged in this kind of loop is, so how are we supposed to express ourselves to be socially accepted? As you said beautifully yourself, we very early on we learn that there's parts of us which are accepted and parts of us which are not. And I believe when it comes to posture, the way that we express ourselves then after we started to condition, we started to engage in this kind of like conditioning cycle. The posture determines how much shame I am carrying. So the way that I am able to fully breathe, fully like opening up this personality that is in there, in this body, in this being, how much liberty I feel, how much entitlement toward this expressive, capacity. That's really how today I can really see somebody's carrying a lot, or somebody's fully, engaged. And interestingly, I like to do this little game with people. Imagine for 1 second that you are completely wrong. Imagine that everything about you is wrong, and that what you do is wrong, and that the way that you are, in how you carry yourself, your clothing, what you do, what you work, how does that feel? And then how does that portray, how does that like relate into your posture? And you will see it's always this sagging motion. What I've been observing, and I would really love to see like maybe your clients, or how you resonate with this, we always try to cover the inner aspect of ourselves, right? The heart. So
Yes.
the
Yes.
core is like, I want to hide this. It's like literally some people have hunchbacks developed conditionally, not even genetically, because of this tendency to having to hide themselves. And these
Yeah.
are very extreme postures, right? And so for me, it became a sort of an obsession around movement. And this is also why I bring it so close into this work, because I believe the way that we are feeling, and the way that we have a relationship with our body and our posture says so much about how much we actually allow ourselves to fully be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that resonates so much. And also from my personal experience, because I've been carrying a lot of shame and trauma, I found myself when I was younger is exactly doing this. So
Mhm.
shoulders come to the front, and I would always, I could not look people into the eyes, right? So I would always like either look down or look away. And it's a totally different bodily experience if I'm like, okay, I'm standing upright and my chest is open and I maintain the eye contact and I'm like this. That is
Mhm.
like I immediately, without even doing any psychological work or whatsoever, I have more confidence taking
Mhm.
this posture compared to this.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
just love to like, to let people experience that for themselves. I am a person,
Mm-hmm.
I always second guessed what people were saying. Clear trauma mechanism, I know. As a
Mm-hmm.
child, as a youngster, I was always second guessing. I couldn't ask more questions. I was never believing what people were saying. One
Mm-hmm.
thing was I needed to experience it for myself. So if somebody says, this is going to happen like this is going to be like this, no, no, no. I want to feel it. I want to know it. So the
Yeah.
same goes with this posture. Feel it. How does it feel? And then
Yeah.
stay there for a moment and ask yourself if you really want to stick to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, could you go a little bit more into detail? If I carry this postural shame around
Hmm.
with me all my life, like how does that influence me on a daily basis? What like negative side effects come with that? And yeah, just maybe explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, with pleasure. I believe I'm a big believer of the idea that we first have to create awareness before we can create change, because otherwise we're just turning the wrong wheels, if you will. And so when it comes to the postural expression of trauma and shame, um, it takes away a lot. So if we look at say like this is my body, and it hunches forward, the energy how it flows is literally crooked. But
Mm-hmm.
what
Yeah.
if I am literally, what if this is my expression? So I have an expression and we're always in motion. And that is probably one of the biggest signs, one of the biggest ways to identify shame in the posture of a person is the way that they are growing as they're moving. And so when I see a posture of someone and they're moving like this, yes, that's like if their motion of the body would move onward, that's probably what they would do. But what if they're moving upward like this? If they're like having this tendency when it go up,
Hmm.
uh, the energy flow very evidently. There's breath, there's flow, and everything wants to go up. Everything wants to flow and blossom and grow upward. Whereas this, there's no light. It just
Yeah.
all goes down. And so, what I like to refer to for people is two things. One is imagine you're a plant. Okay, we're literally plants, but let's imagine for a second we are plants. Okay, and so a plant grows toward where the light is. Okay, and eyes, they are basically they're basically out the focus where we think the light is. So if the light is downward, where I believe that I have to cover myself in order to still be able to grow, then that's where I grow toward. But if I believe that the light is actually up there, and I have full expressive liberty, then that's where my energy goes, that's where everything goes up. And also, interestingly, abundance, the mythical topic of today's society, abundance, richness, money, and everything, it comes with your posture, it comes with your expression.
Hmm.
The more you are growing upward, the more you're naturally connecting to everything around you. But if you're curling, if everything goes down, how much wealth can sit in there? It can simply
Hmm.
survive. So that's a little more elaborate.
Hmm. Yeah, I resonate with that so much. And it's so interesting what you said about abundance, because I feel like, people have this tendency to think, okay, abundance is something that is outside of me, and that is something that I need to somehow cultivate and bring into me. And how I see it is that abundance is actually your natural state of being, and you are abundant. But what you
Mhm.
have to get rid of is the scarcity and the shame and the bad posture. So if you open up and you're way more abundant already than you were before when you were like this, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, 100% agree.
Are there more things that are, in your experience from your work with your clients, affected in people that carry a lot of unresolved shame in their bodies? Like, what are other things that are affected by that?
Let's see. Again, let's approach the subject, if you may, if that is okay for you and everybody listening, from the perspective of creating awareness, because I
Hmm.
believe, again, that's very important. So let's try to identify further on how we express ourselves if we carry shame in that context. Something that I've been noticing a lot is the rigidity of movement.
Mm.
Very, very clear pattern when we try to control, when we try to contain. And so I really like to express these kind of feelings with natural tendencies. So the more there is tension, the more there's rigidity, the more there is conceptions, the more there is control, the more shame there has to be. Because ultimately, if I would feel free to simply be, how much need for control would there be? I could bounce from moment to moment and it will be all cool. But because I am afraid of the outcome of the next moment, because I don't trust myself to handle it, I start to control. I start to influence, start to put up, planes and boundaries and say, like, this is wrong, this is right, I need this, this is good, this is bad, himmel, like, heaven, hell. So these are all elements where we have been practicing for centuries to identify patterns as to be this is the right norm, and everything within here is okay, but everything outside is to be wooed. And so we have integrated this, culturally speaking, into our posture, into our behavior patterns, into our mannerisms. And so when I'm talking to someone who is, I just had an example a couple of days ago, a guy, he earns around 600 million, in revenue with his company. This is incredible, right? He has like one of the most successful companies here in the UAE. Like he earns an incredible amount of money every single year. Um, wow. So that was my first question. So he has a lot of money and he earns a lot and he built a lot. But when I saw him, he was slumping. He was always like this, always trying to swagger, always trying to like show. it was never authentic. There was very little about this person that I could really resonate with because he was never truly free to sit. How are you? Good to meet you. Another human being. Wow, let's have a conversation. It was
Mm-hmm.
continuously about a profit benefit increase in whatever, bigger, 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 bigger. And
Yeah.
that is the mannerism that I see in like in many people. So the bigger the shame, to like bring it to a point, the bigger the shame, the more we feel a need to create something around it in order to hide it, if that makes sense. And that
Mm-hmm.
is either an incredible, right? I mean, I've been a bodybuilder for some time, not for nothing. I tried to hide incredible amounts of shame.
Mm-hmm.
So, the bigger something has to look like or appear like, the more shame you're trying to hide, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Ah, that resonates so much. Yeah. You mentioned awareness, right, as the key tool to, yeah, to get rid of the shame or to resolve also trauma, and I resonate with that, right, because one thing that comes along with shame but also with trauma is that it acts out of the unconscious, out of the shadow. And so to change the patterns that you have, may it be posture or other things, relational patterns, you need to get an awareness around it and, be ruthless in a way about
Mhm.
what you are doing and why you are doing it. So other than that, do you have any recommendations what people can do if they carry a lot of shame and they want to change something?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we already touched on it briefly in the sense accepting and allowing is the enemy of shame. It only exists because we try to hide. It has literally, it has nothing to feed on if we want to put it into a kind of like an evil mannerism, whatever. If we want to put it there, there's nothing that it can feed on in the light of broad awareness. The more you are allowing it to exist, the less power it receives. It sounds contradictory, a little counterintuitive, but imagine it that way. So I'm never looking at what's behind my back. Yes, I actually don't know what's behind my back. Okay, so I just see it out of the corner of my eye, and it kind of like looks big, and it has weird colors. Okay, and so like I actually don't know what it is, and I'm kind of afraid, and so I try to always look forward, always try to look there. I try to be very busy, and so the more I'm trying to be busy, I still see it in my peripheral vision, right? It's still there. I can feel it. I can smell it sometimes, it's there. But because I only see it a little bit and then I try to, get myself busy again, my idea of what is behind me is huge because I only see fractions of it. I only see little bits and parts that maybe sometimes show up in the manners like, "Ugh," like somebody just slapped me. It's like, no, no, I have to get busy again. And so this is for me, this is a beautiful example of someone who's like, I'm a very busy person, really. So what are you trying to not look at? What is it exactly that you're so afraid of? Why can't you just enjoy? And so so now, interestingly, what happens is if I actually turn around, I see that it's something very simple usually, maybe unknown, and because of that, uncomfortable. Usually, the unknown, it's the stuff that we don't really deal with or have never seen fully, is very uncomfortable because it's out of context. It's out of our comfort zone in the sense we're not used to it. But with every single thing that we have ever spent time with, eventually we got comfortable with
Yeah.
that. And so looking at it in a sense, becoming more aware, yeah, it's there. It's not something you cannot cut it away. We try desperately, but it's still there. So the more we look at it, I believe, alone or under guidance, there's plenty of material out there. The more we actually take the time, meditate, however you want to do it, the more it becomes real, tangible, and we can start to work with it. Otherwise, it stays in the blank space
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'd like to share a personal experience with that. Um, and that is again related to my body because when I was deeply in the eating disorder, I felt so much shame around my belly. That was always for me the thing. I was like, oh, that's too big and I don't want to look at it. So literally, when I was looking in the mirror, I avoided looking at my belly because I didn't want to see it. And on a postural level, like in daily life, I would always suck the belly in, and that to an amount that wasn't even conscious anymore. And what came with that, of course, was I couldn't breathe properly. So I realized then when I started doing yoga and meditation, and I tried to consciously breathe, that when I would breathe in, which is usually the expansion also of the belly, I would actually pull the belly in while breathing in. I was like, what the fuck? This is not working. What am I doing? Right? So that took me, and that took me a lot of consciousness and training to get rid of this,
Mhm.
right? And to actually allow my belly to expand when I was breathing in, which was a very hard transition. And then also on a physical level, uh, every day, really for years, every day, I could set a timer, 4 p.m. in the afternoon, my belly would start to hurt and I would have terrible stomach pain, because I was sucking in the belly the whole day and my organs were just like in contraction the whole, yeah,
Mhm.
just like
Wow.
just an example of how that can, influence not only your psyche but actually the physical body. And then
Mhm.
also goes back to your psyche because, yeah, if your body feels like shit, you're probably also not going to feel so well overall.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I had the same thing, right? I mean, it's not for nothing that I always tried to have like a six pack. It's
Hmm.
probably the hardest way that you can have a belly. So the
Yeah.
hardest, you know, so there's literally nothing there.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
plain. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I can
Yeah.
relate.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how do you work with clients if they come to you and you discover they carry a lot of shame. What do you do with them? How do you help them?
So first of all, I have several containers. I like to work one on one. However, that is a very intense kind of setting, right? Where you are really digging individually into your stuff and systematically tuning down. It's kind of like I like to refer to it as a mapping, where I'm really helping people to create as much awareness around their patterns as possible. Um, and what we really do is like, so I work a lot with movement. I give people a lot of movement games, right? I think an element that I like to employ is games, the kind of
Beautiful.
playfulness that helps to shake out, ah, I always, I like to always like kind of in motion. There's always a part of my system that is moving naturally anyway. So I really like, I use a lot of movement patterns that I help people with, but then there's a lot of asking, how does that feel? Where do you resonate? Like, because I believe there is kind of the multi-layer body. So you have the physical, you have the emotional, you have the mental, you have the spiritual. And so what I work a lot with is, so right now, what do you experience? Well, I experience anger. Okay. So where in the body does that resonate? Try to bring your hand to that part. And there's definitely a part where it resonates the most. And so what I try to do is help people identify the relations in between the bodies so that there can be more pathways to the present, if you will. And this is most probably the core essence of my work as retreats and seminars, workshops, but also like one-on-one coachings go. My the playground that I create around people and their development is really helping them to become as present as possible. And because all these trauma responses keep us running away, we're very little present. And so naturally, it is very difficult for most people to actually stay in the here and now for more than a couple of seconds,
Yeah.
right? And so basically,
Yes.
that is, yeah, exactly. And that is where I can identify in myself first, but then I'll help others as well identify how much stuff do you actually carry.
Yeah.
So it's always like trailing back, finding back into the here and now. What's actually going on? No context. I don't need to know where it's from and blah blah blah. If that helps, if it's a picture or something that pops up, but where is the anchor point in the now? Feeling the body, feeling in there and wherever. So that's basically how I work the most. I really like in-person workshops probably because they're very, the very clear container of a couple of hours, but I also I enjoy retreats beyond anything. You just have a couple of days where you can really take a deep dive with a selected group of people. Absolutely beautiful. But then again, it's just a pleasure also to sit with someone individually and just help them really create more awareness, more presence, if you will.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I love retreats too. Maybe we should do one together at some point.
I love it. Yes, that's actually a great idea. You guys stay tuned. I think that's definitely going to happen at some point. Thank you, Carolyn. I really, really appreciate yourself. Like you're an amazing human being. I already felt so when we first met. And I just really wanted to take this moment to appreciate you sitting here and sharing your wisdom, and everyone looking here, like really taking this masterclass in. I mean, it's 55 to 60 minutes now, really packed with, the collected information and experience of us. So, any last words? Anything that you would really love everybody watching to leave this class with, if you have something on your mind, Carolyn?
Yeah, I would love to go back to the authenticity part once more and just like really underline the fact that if your authenticity, who you truly are, is not well received, that person, that job, that situation is not for you. And you deserve to be loved, celebrated, and supported in your authenticity all the fucking time. And that is actually the embodying of your own self worth to leave spaces where that is not happening.
Wow, yes, please. Yeah, just write it down, people, please, tattoo it if necessary. Yeah, thank you very, very much again from the bottom of my heart. I really, really
Mm.
appreciated this time now, this incredible talk. And to everybody who has been sticking with us to this very last moment, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thank you so much for showing up every single day, for having the courage to face whatever you struggle with, and also for having the courage to engage in life, and not be a passive consumerist sitting on the couch hoping for everything to pass. Thank you that you are, honestly. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day and hopefully to see you soon. Bye bye.